running a business is very difficult, but getting into a restaurant, it's even more difficult.
So what is your specific restaurant brand? What does that cost based upon how you're pricing your menu items and diving into all the details of each recipe?
Having those plans, creating the action plan absolutely would be a key differentiator.
You start the marketing the right way and you build your name, not just your restaurant name, but you build your name in the community, the likelihood of success is much higher.
Running a business is very hard, but running a restaurant is even harder. So that's today we're going to talk about the topics that you need to be successful. We're going to drill down into the numbers, the metrics, and the financials of the restaurants today. And hopefully you'll get a lot of valuable knowledge that you can start paying attention to today. So we are again honored to have Kendall Ware with us. He has ran 6 different brands across 3 different industries. Lastly, the president of Cinnabon. So today's topic is right up his alley. He has done smaller brands to, again, global brands with a couple of thousand locations. And I think last I heard was about $2.5 billion in revenue a year. So without further ado, let's get started. So Kendall,
awesome.
We want to drill down on the how do we become a successful restaurant? What are the steps? What are the we want to drill down into the financials and first understand that. Yeah. So that way we don't get into a thin margin situation where we open the restaurant and it's like, well, it has thin margins.
Right.
So the first thing I want to touch base on is having a plan, getting a plan together, writing down the goals, getting the vision, making sure that you crunch the numbers before you even sign the lease, right?
Right.
Is this restaurant going to have enough revenue to justify the cost? Or is it going to put us again in that thin margin category where we just want to put a stop to it and not go any further? So when you were opening, you opened locations globally in Dubai, in South America, obviously here in the US, what were the metrics you guys were looking at, and how were you guys picking and choosing where to open, where not to open?
Yeah. So it depends upon who we're talking to, right? If you are let's just say a restaurant operator opening up your own concept, it's going to be more of a risk. You're going to have less data to help inform you, but you need to do a pro forma. You have to have a business plan. You have to get to know the area and similar like restaurant concepts to yours, and gather as much insight as you possibly can just to get a directional feel and understanding, right? Understanding the traffic counts of whatever center you chose or whatever area you chose to develop in. Now, when you're on the franchise side, you have a lot more data, right? You have access to what type of real estate model works for our brand. You have track records, a lot of history. But to the average person opening up a restaurant, you just have to run the numbers yourself based upon whatever you do have access to. But understand it's going to take time. Whatever number you come up with, it's going to take time to get there.
Sure.
But if you set your business up right, and you start the marketing the right way, and you build your name, not just your restaurant name, but you build your name in the community, the likelihood of success is much higher.
Of course.
Right?
Yeah.
But when I look at this, the first thing I always focus on is having great people. No matter what, the foundation of any business is having great people. And those people have to align with whatever your culture is. Right? They have to be culturally aligned people with your business, or otherwise, most likely it'll be a short-term relationship. Right?
Absolutely.
And that's just more and more churn and more complexities in the beginning of opening up a restaurant. So having that foundation of great people, and then diving into the operational excellence. What is that service? What are the food costs and recipes? What is your overall restaurant readiness program? What are the things that you need to do to operate your restaurant well? And once you've achieved all that, that's when you got to start honing in on those financial fundamentals of actually owning and operating a business.
Absolutely. Actually, it's funny because normally I say, we don't want to mention brands and everything, but I'll make an exception this one time. We have a customer, Easy's Brick Oven Pizza, and I was talking to him and he's like, yeah, we have 2 locations. Here's what we're doing. Here's our average unit volume, etc. Here's the plan moving forward. And I was amazed at how well he had established, and he had gone beyond where I think any restaurant owner would. And what he said that really caught my attention, he said, look, our labor cost is through the roof because I've hired a 3rd manager because we're opening another location, and I'm taking the chance now. I've hired this person. I'm going to have him work here. So my labor is going to be through the roof. So his he's to a typical restaurant owner, that'd be an expense, right? I don't need to do that. I'll just take what he said is absolutely, it's an investment, but he said, I don't want to take my best guys from these 2 locations, move it to the new location, and now the existing locations are suffering.
Right.
So what he decided to do is get the manager in this location, get him started. Yes, it's going to cost him money, but it has a return on investment because it ensures that the next location will be successful.
Sure.
And he doesn't have to move a manager, a top performing manager from a successful location to a brand new location where there's such a high risk.
Yeah, he's building a bench. Right?
Absolutely.
Yep.
So I think, again, looking at having those plans, creating the action plan absolutely would be a key differentiator between success and failure.
Right. And a lot of times where people fail is they open their doors and the first thing they focus on is how to save money.
Oh, wow.
Right. So cut this person, cut that person. Yeah. Hey, stop serving that item. Like they start finding ways to cut or to save money because they're so nervous, which I understand. You just invested however many hundreds of thousands of dollars into this business. So yes, of course, you're going to want to be cutting labor and you want to be figuring out ways to save money. But in the beginning, it's all about finding your brand, right? It's about finding how to operate this restaurant. It's getting your people used to operating this restaurant. And it's consistent training on all the products and services that you provide. But if you cut that in the beginning to save money, you're not going to even be able to get to what really matters, which is how you drive long-term value of this restaurant.
Well, you set yourself up for failure because now the customer comes in and now you got share another story. We had a restaurant that opened and we had our waitlist reservation in there, and then they had forgotten to block it. So some lady came in, made a post, and they didn't know, but she had like 500,000 followers, and they got overrun.
Yeah.
So now if you cut costs down,
thank you so much.
And if you've cut costs down, now you don't have enough labor.
Right.
So how do you deal with that? And then that translates into negative feedback online.
Right.
So then at that stage, you're done. You've got 50 ratings, and half of them are 2-3 stars because you couldn't keep up because you were trying to save money. Good luck. I mean, those negative reviews are not going to go away, and you're going to have to get so many more positive reviews. It's going to take you years to recover from that.
Right. But once you've mastered the people and operations side of the business, that's when you can hone in more on the financials, right? And you can take that deeper dive. You can really understand what it takes to operate your business and how to sustain it in the long term, right?
Sure.
And that's before you go out and start really marketing and telling the world about your brand. Thank you. Because if you do that, if you go out and focus on marketing, let's say first, and I'm not talking about like pre-opening where you're doing the basics of marketing. I mean like truly getting out there and telling the masses that you're open and ready for them. The question is, are you? Are you really ready for them? Do you understand everything within the 4 walls of your business to where you truly are confident enough to tell your entire community? And so I look at the order as being the most fundamental thing of operating a restaurant business is ensuring you have the people, the operations, and then you've honed in on your financials. Once you're ready, then that's when you go tell the world about your brand.
Absolutely. So I think guys, just have a plan together. Make sure that you understand the metrics. Make sure that your restaurant, the numbers make sense. Make sure you have the right staff in there, and make sure you do what Easiest Brick Oven did, is they overstaffed an existing one so that they could move a qualified manager to manage a restaurant. People are going into a restaurant, they expect certain things. The food's got to be good. If the food is not good, then they're not going to come back, right? If the food is amazing but the service is horrible, then again, they're not going to come back. So those two, I think that's what makes a restaurant business really difficult, because you could sell an iPhone and every single one will be exactly identical.
That's right.
But if I go to location one of some steakhouse and I order medium, and I go to another one and I order medium, the other one may come out medium rare or may come out medium well. So it's difficult to get it right. So it's important to train, and it's important to invest that resources before you open that restaurant and do those trainings.
And it's the repetition, right? Apple can produce a new iPhone consistently every single time.
That's right.
Because they know what they're doing now.
Correct.
Right. The first one was a little choppy back in 2007, right? There was a lot of issues, but it's also
it actually didn't even do picture messaging at the time.
Right. Nothing, right? So, but we thought that was the hottest thing ever.
Absolutely.
But if you look at the restaurant, same thing. The other mistake I see people make when they first open a restaurant is they do go after that marketing aspect, or they jump to that grand opening event very quickly. And next thing you know, you had this awesome day of sales because you told everybody about it, but there was no residual.
Yeah.
There was no
They
return
didn't come back, yeah.
because you scared off majority of those consumers because you were not ready. The repetition was not built. And so that's why I stay focused on making sure you have the right people in the place who know how to execute the operations, and you understand the financials that make your business operate. That is when you're ready to bring more people in, and then you can handle the volume that you're going to receive when you tell the public that you're ready for them.
Absolutely. And again, it's a return on investment. Running a restaurant, this is our next topic that we want to jump in, is running a restaurant is like running a business. So you need to treat it like running a business, right? Yeah. It's not, yes, you're serving food, but it's a business that happens to be serving food and needs to be good at food quality and customer service and. But again, it's running a business. Yeah. So let's drill down into kind of, I think, I've talked to some restaurant owners that unfortunately they haven't educated themselves and they don't understand some of the numbers. So I think a couple of things, you've got some stories that I'm sure you've ran across or you've dealt with so many different brands, so many different franchisee groups, so many different people, etc., managers. What was your take? Like, you feel like they had a good grasp on the financials?
So honestly, in a lot of cases, no. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It's just when I look at all the different brands I've led and the various franchisees across that or people that join the support team, usually, if I were to summarize where I had to put most of my time and effort, or let's call it development time, into, was around business acumen. Now, the positive side of most restaurant operators is they have a passion that you don't find anywhere else.
Absolutely.
Right? So restaurants has a passionate group of people, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're skilled at how to run a business. Some people get into the restaurant industry and own a restaurant because they love restaurants. They may not necessarily love business or understand the full aspects of business. And I've always put it on myself as a franchisor, as a leader, to find more ways to educate more people, because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. That's not necessarily that person's fault. But when I look back, there's been so many times where some of what I would say the most perfectly matched franchisees or restaurant managers have been a part of my brands in the past that were the best of the best. But when you started diving into the financials, we started having those conversations about business plans, food costs, inventory, that's where the hang up always was.
I got you.
Right? In terms of not understanding what that is, asking questions like, how do I calculate food costs? Or a room full of 40 people doing an onboarding session and half of the room raised their hand when we asked who does not know what a P&L is. People hear P&L and like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And what is a profit and loss, right? And again, it's not to make fun of those people. It's just saying that it's not common knowledge. Although if you're in this industry, if you are in business, you assume, oh, that's common knowledge. How do you not know that? But we all got to take a step back and realize that if you're coming into the restaurant industry, you may not have those skills. You definitely didn't learn them in high school.
Absolutely.
I didn't learn them in high school.
Well, I didn't.
I didn't even make it to college.
I was thinking just now, when I started my first company, nobody came in and said, hey, this is what a P&L is. This is what a balance sheet is. This is what, gross profit, top line revenue, net margins, This is what a markup is. Nobody explained any of that.
No, and that's why I never went to college, because I was not ever feeling like I was actually learning in high school. And that's not necessarily the school system's fault. That's just me. I wasn't interested in what school had to offer. But the moment I got my first gig and I was 19 years old, opening up new restaurants and learning about all these financial, I was excited. I was interested. So I wanted to put all my time into running restaurants, and that's what I did.
That's where I think that piggybacks on that passionate part.
I was passionate, but I didn't know anything.
They're passionate about running the restaurant, but running a business, it's a kind of different ball game, because you got to run a business ultimately. You're there to make money. You're not I always say, look, we're not a non-profit organization. We too have to make money.
So in every brand so far that I've led, and that's 6, I always asked a question to franchisees, and every single brand always had at least one franchisee. When I would ask the question, how do you know if you're successful or not? The answer was, I always make sure there's money in my bank account. As long as there's still money in my bank account, I know I'm okay. And that's not true. It's so scary, because that's how a lot of people measure their business. If I wake up and there's a positive account balance, I'm okay. But how higher could that balance be?
Sure.
Where could you optimize? Where could you save? Where could you raise revenue? What could you do to drive more of that income? But a lot of times people just are okay with that simple, I guess, satisfaction of, yeah, there's money in the account.
Sure. Yeah, I agree. Let's kind of drill down a little bit. I think the two metrics that are really important in running a day-to-day business, i.e. now a restaurant, we want to kind of touch base on fixed expenses and operating expenses. What are the differences? What are some of the fixed expenses? What are some of the operating expenses, and how to optimize in that? So obviously fixed expenses are things that don't change from month to month. And I think that's where a business gets an advantage, because your rent is the same every month. Your electricity bill may be a little bit variable, but more or less, it's fixed. Your fixed buying equipment, all that stuff. So we want to categorize some of these. Again, look at the difference between fixed and operating costs. So did you guys have any metrics, anything that you ran that, or can we educate our listeners a little bit on the differences and how to categorize these expenses?
Yeah. So you usually hear people say, hey, fixed costs are the ones you can't control, right? And variable costs are the ones that you can.
Okay, perfect. Great example.
It is a great example, and I agree with that, except for a small little caveat. On the fixed expense side, how did you get to those expenses to begin with? Because you can control it in the beginning, right?
That's correct, yep.
So it's some people always look at the fix and say, oh, well, I can't control that, so I'm going to ignore it. But it's always worth a second look, especially if you've been open for a long period of time and you've never renegotiated anything like a lease. Or even, I used to have restaurant operators, go look at every single line item of the P&L and find something that is over a certain percentage of revenue and just see if there's ways to save.
Sure.
In a lot of cases, something as small as how many days a week trash is picked up could save you a certain amount of money. Right?
That's true.
So think about it. Like if you're in a center or on your own or whatever it is, and you have 5 pickups a week, right? Because you used to be at a certain volume, or that's just how you set it up. If you don't necessarily need that, and they're there every single day picking up a bag of trash, what's the point? So it's just finding the details of how to optimize those fixed expenses on the front end, and or to go renegotiate and find ways to refix them to get them in the best, most suitable places possible. From there, then of course, it's about the variable costs, and that is where you spend a lot of your time honing in on the food cost and understanding what not only are you buying in purchases, but what's the actual cost of goods that you're selling.
That's right.
And there's a big difference there.
Absolutely. And that goes back to knowing your numbers.
Right.
So looking at your profit and loss statement, your P&L statement, making sure that you know where the money is going, making sure how much money you're spending on what, and again, what can you control, what can you not control.
Sure.
All right, so we've touched base on that. The next thing is sales, because I think sales will cure all problems.
Absolutely.
So if you're overspending 100%, you're spending twice as much for trash pickup. But if you're making an extra 15 grand a year, it doesn't matter, right? Because the cost savings is not going to be justifiable on that.
Sure.
I think running a business, the first priority should be, how do I get the maximum amount of foot traffic? How do I maximize my profit? And I think in a restaurant, you've been part of some I don't want to say low volume, but like average unit volume that is less than $1 million. You've been part of some that are over $1 million. It seems like that $1 million mark is a big key part, because once you get, it's difficult to get to $1 million, but once you get to $1 million, it's easier to keep growing, and also your profit margins will just go through the roof.
Right.
So let's run through some of these numbers. What are some of the averages that you've seen? Obviously, National Restaurant Association did a survey, and average restaurant is doing $659,000 a year. But at some concept that may be really good, but if you're a sit-down restaurant, that's like peanuts. It doesn't even pay for your basic expenses.
I think there's a lot of factors, right? One, are you an operator or are you a absentee owner of this business, right? Because that's different. Are you trying to collect a salary? Are you trying to provide a living off of this, or is this a side business? But when you look at all the different various types, yes, when you usually hit that $1 million mark, that's usually when things all start to work out. Exactly. Now, can you get the average sandwich shop to do that? Maybe, maybe not. But it's understanding how all these other numbers, how do the numbers add up? Is it enough to sustain that business, even if you do only hit 600, 700,000? If you're trying to go after more, you're trying to find economies of scale and lower your overall expenses, you have to raise revenue. Now, you can do that by obviously putting all your effort into your business and trying to drive that number up. Or if it's a smaller business, you're trying to get to $1 million, maybe you're doing acquisition. Maybe you're buying up other smaller concepts. You're doing more franchise deals. You're finding more ways to drive that top line number to help, make up for some of that. It all depends upon that person's passion and what their operating status is, whether they're actively engaged or not, and how much they want to collect from this business. And that goes back to the business plan, the pro formas, everything on the front end that should have been done so they knew what they were getting themselves into.
That's correct. Yeah. And my thing is, if you do the numbers and it doesn't make sense to start it, then
don't do it.
Yeah, exactly. But I think a lot of people fail to do the numbers, so they get into it, and now all of a sudden they're stuck at $659,000 a year.
Right.
And it's like, well, we have thin margins.
Right.
So we've discussed this topic in very detail. If you haven't listened to our other podcast, absolutely go back and listen to it. It's the subject line should be why restaurants don't have thin margins, or get into the details of that and understand what we mean by getting to that $1 million mark.
If I can go back just real quick on the, let's just say, food cost side of things. Another trend, just thinking about it, is there's a lot of franchisees, a lot of restaurant operators who just don't have the time or don't make the time to do inventory. Mm-hmm. And that's a common response that I hear. And that's scary to me. Like doing inventory is time consuming. And today there's so many technologies and support systems that it's not that difficult, but it can be time consuming, especially if you're taking a piece of paper and going just around the restaurant.
It down,
but this is where majority of your money is going. Right? In a tangible way. Yes, on average, 30% of your revenue is going to go towards labor.
Sure.
Okay. But that money is going directly to that person. There's no way you can get it back. There's no way you're going to optimize that. That is what it is. But when you're talking about 30% of your food costs, if that's your average, you have more control over that. And I always look at inventory as your other bank account. Whatever's in the walk-in cooler, that's your bank account, right? Whatever's on dry storage, that's your bank account. That's just your funds sitting out. Yeah. So are you over-purchasing, or are you under-purchasing and affecting quality, recipes, and demand? Whichever it is, you don't know unless you're doing inventory. And a lot of times there are brands, and some are small, but some are very large, who say, hey, we just look at purchases.
Yeah.
But purchases is one part of the equation. So, you can't just say, oh yeah, my food cost is good because I've only purchased X and I did X. It's more about the cost of goods sold.
Sure.
So understanding, obviously beginning inventory plus purchases minus ending inventory, divided into your net revenue, that's what the number you need to be looking at. But if you don't know the cost of goods sold, it does you no good. And you also don't know if your recipes are being followed or any other details that make up that money.
Yeah, I think people are just running away from those quote unquote burdens, right? Because it's time consuming. I don't want to do inventory, right? It's just
it's the bulk of your restaurant.
It looks okay.
Yeah.
But actually, I had an innovative idea from one of our existing customers, and he said, look, we look at our food costs and everything, and then if the moment it crosses a threshold, then we'll do inventory for 8 weeks. And then we kind of back down a little bit.
Right.
And then until that number is back in line. So if you're not doing that, that may be a great way to start, right?
Right.
Just monitor that, and then figure out what your average should be or what it is.
Sure.
And then if you have a variance, then you start doing inventory for 8 weeks.
Sure.
And then you scale back down to maybe once a month or something, and something to at least do it.
Yeah.
And once you get it down under control, then it takes you no more than an hour or two to just get it done.
Knock it out. And know your business model, right? Is 30% the right average? We all use 30% in the restaurant industry so commonly, but I know plenty that do 25, 24, some 27. You can do less, but it's about your model. Some models have to do 35% because it's the level of quality that they desire. So what is your specific restaurant brand? What does that cost based upon how you're pricing your menu items and diving into all the details of each recipe?
And actually, I had another conversation here in this restaurant with one of our customers, and he was talking about dynamic pricing. If I have chicken left over and if I have barbecue left over, etc., can I dynamically price it so I can do a 25% discount after 7 p.m. so I can get rid of it? That way it doesn't sit there or go to trash. So I think there are a lot of innovative ideas. And again, I think knowing your numbers, having that data available, and then making these actionable decisions, having that actionable data that tells you, hey, you should do that. Or, I think back in 2014, we had a company that bought another, back then there was no AI, so it was all BI, business intelligence. So the gentleman that was doing the demo said, "Oh yeah, look at this. I can go drill down on this, do that. Look at my revenue per hour. Look at my labor per hour. Look at this. Look at that. Look at my utility expenses. Oh, by the way, after like 20 minutes, he's like, oh, we should close at 8 p.m." It's like, well, I mean, that should have been automated, right? And today those technology exist where it just does the math and it's like, hey, Kendall, you should close at 8 p.m. and here's why. Because your labor is this much, your sales are this much, your operating expenses are this much. It makes no sense to stay open beyond 8 p.m. So I think having the right tech stack inside of that restaurant and making sure that it's actionable so you don't have to dig in and make your job harder to try to get to the bottom of it is going to be a key differentiator as well.
Agreed.
Let's go down to the P&L statement. So now we're actually where rubber hits the road. So we want to talk about top line revenue. What is that? Gross profit, net profit, all of those different metrics. So run us through a P&L statement. So you've dealt with $2.5 billion brand. So what's the top line revenue? So what is that?
Yeah, so your top line, of course, is just everything that you've rung up, right? Whatever you sold within your four walls, that's your top line revenue. That's your gross number. That's what it is. Now, to get your net number, you're going to minus your discounts and whatever other deals that you've worked out. But end of the day, if you're looking at P&L, you have your top line. That is all the revenue that's coming in. And then if you skip all the way to the bottom line, the EBITDA number, that's the profitability you're walking away with.
Well, we don't want to get into EBITDA yet. We don't want to confuse people.
In the middle is obviously where all the magic happens.
Of course. So top line revenue could be your sales. It could be called revenue, income, top line. Some people, total sales. So that's typically your all of your whatever revenue you bring in minus your comps, voids, refunds, etc. Okay. So gross profit. So now we're going one line down on our P&L statement. What's our gross profit? What does that mean?
And the most simple way to put it, it's everything that you rung up minus what it cost you to make it.
Okay, perfect. So take out my cost of goods sold, whatever I've sold it for. So if I sold, I don't know, a dish for $15, cost me $5, my gross profit is $10.
There you go.
Okay. And then going down to our net profit. So what is our net profit? What's the difference between our gross profit and net profit?
So now you're taking out all the expenses that it took to operate or to deliver that menu item, so to speak.
So what are my expenses?
So people, rent, everything that goes into this building, right? Everything that goes into producing the element, all your other costs, your electricity, everything that you have to keep the lights on in this restaurant is now being deducted from that gross profit amount.
Gotcha. And then that leads us to our net profit. So if you did $1 million and then your cost of goods sold is 30%, that's $300,000. Your gross profit is $700,000. And then let's say your, I don't know, we had some numbers previously in here. So then if you deduct all of your expenses, rent, utilities, labor, food costs, all of that, you end up with your net margin of, let's say, $197,000.
Right.
Okay, very good. What is so we want to end with an actionable note. If somebody's not doing something, or what is the one thing that they could start doing today to make an impact?
So two things for me. One is you have to understand what your why is in the first place. Why are you in business? What are you trying to achieve? Are you trying to replace the jobs income that you currently have? Or is this just your livelihood? Is this what it's all about? Like, what is the plan for you? What's the why? What does it ultimately lead back to? What's driving you to want to even deal with the day-to-day of a restaurant business where it's very complex compared to some businesses? What is that why? Make sure that why is very, very clear and that it aligns with the culture of your restaurant.
Sure.
The second thing I would just say is to dive into every line item of the P&L. We just covered some highlights, but a lot of times that's what people do is they look at top line and bottom line and okay, that's it.
Everything in between is ignored.
Right.
As long as the bottom number hopefully is green, not red.
Yeah. So as a best practice, in percentages they have to make up on their own, but work backwards. If you're hitting only 10%, profit margin today and you want to get to 20%, go find and highlight areas of your P&L where the percentage is higher than the rest. So if you see something that jumps out at you, it's like, wow, that line item is 40% in this category. Well, let's go dive into that. Sure. But dive into your P&L and find ways to impact it. That doesn't necessarily mean always cutting costs. That could mean that you might actually need to increase some costs. So let's say it's labor.
Sure.
You might have high in food costs or high in waste because you don't have enough people on or the right people on, so it's just creating more mistakes. But you could go invest a few more dollars, and that could drive more revenue because now the quality's higher.
Qualified staff,
right?
So that way the dishes are not coming back.
Right. So I don't say dive into P&L to just cut costs, but dive into P&L to understand how your business actually operates and where you can impact an area to help generate more revenue and, or of course, put more to the bottom line.
Absolutely.
So
how often should they be looking at that P&L statement?
Well, monthly at a minimum. But yes, definitely monthly. And it can't be this, it comes out halfway through the following month and I take a glance at it. It should be full-blown P&L reviews with whoever's responsible or working with you in that restaurant. Whoever your partners are, dive into that every single month. But of course, along the way, there should be certain touch points outside of an official P&L statement that you are getting a glimpse of, or at least a snapshot of where your business is.
Yeah, and we actually haven't talked about balance sheet as well, but once you get into these multi-location brands, smaller locations, they can get away without having a balance sheet because it may not be as important, although it is important. But once you get into these multiple multi-unit and you're trying to grow a brand, then you really want to also pay attention to your balance sheet.
Right.
And give us a summary of what a balance sheet is as well.
It's your cash, essentially. It's understanding where your cash is.
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
And where it's going, what's coming in. But, I think that you can get more complex when you start talking about cash flow, balance sheets, and every other, metric out there. But for the average restaurant operator, they need to master that P&L first.
Yep.
That P&L is what it's all about. Now, yes, you can have a good P&L and no cash. That's another conversation, probably a whole other podcast.
Yep.
But understand that P&L first, because that ultimately is the input that makes everything else, good or bad.
Absolutely.
In simple terms.
Yeah, and just to kind of drill down a little bit, so when you get into your balance sheet, then it's all of your liabilities, it's all of your assets, and then obviously they add up to your equities, all the money that has built up over time or shareholder distributions, all of that stuff. But again, you multi-brand operators or even multi-unit franchisees have to know that. And back to your point, some of these multi-unit franchisees also don't have a good grasp on P&L and balance sheet, and they're running, we have some customers that are operating 150 units of a single brand, and then if you add their entire portfolio, they're at 600, 700, 800 locations, so they're very large operators. But I don't know if they're doing that stuff or not, but if they're not, then obviously that would be a huge part of running a successful restaurant. And again, we've talked about it, running a business is very difficult, but getting into a restaurant, it's even more difficult because food is so variable. Some of these costs, it's so detailed that it's difficult to maybe sometimes track, etc. And then you got to make sure that it's spot on quality on service and food and etc. But
and you have to have targets and projections that you're working towards, right? Or your team knows you're trying to achieve. You can't just take whatever comes in the door, right?
Yeah, well, actually, the best thing I've heard is, if a ship at harbor, you can't just kind of turn the engine on and say, go. So if there is no plots, if there's no maps, you get into a plane, before that plane even takes off, there is 3 hours of work that's done prior to that. They're mapping out their route, they're planning on how are we going to get from point A to point B. I think majority of business owners just simply don't do that because I don't know why. It doesn't make sense. The first thing I do when I look at a new business is, how do I plan? What am I gonna make? And then actually that brings up a good point, because then it makes things relative. So if I'm going after a $1 million business and you're asking me to invest $500,000, I'm gonna think 3, 4, 5, 10 times, and I'll say no. But if you're telling me to invest $5 million, but the upside is $1 billion company, then it's like, $5 million, it's nothing. Now, higher risk, higher reward. I may lose my $5 million versus the 500,000 that has less risk. But a lot of private equity, a lot of VCs, all those guys, that's what they're doing as well. They're looking at these unicorns where it has a massive upside, but again, knowing your numbers, and it makes things relative, because then it's like, well, I can pay a little bit more for rent because I can get to X.
And a lot of times, especially at the executive level, you're always talking about the big numbers, the top line. Okay, we got to do X amount more in millions or hundreds of thousands to achieve whatever the target is. But when it comes down to actually bringing it to life, you have to break that down into bite-sized chunks that help the average team member understand what that means to them. right? Even the average restaurant operator. So if you're trying, let's say you're trying to get to $1 million and you're at $800,000 right now, that's your trend. Well, how do you gain that $200,000? What more do you have to sell, right? What smoothie or what menu item do you have to sell per day, heck, even per shift, to get to that number in the course of a year? But if you can do that math and work backwards and go to your team and say, hey, right now the goal is to sell 5 more of this per day, per shift, that's going to change the game.
Funny you said that.
It starts to work its way up.
Yeah, we say, hey, increase sales by 150 grand a year. Okay. But some of the people that we've talked to, it's like, well, how? Yeah, like that's not possible. But once you break it down, it's like, hey, it's $150,000 a year. That's a big number. But you break it down on a weekly basis, it's $2,884 a week.
Yep.
You break it down further to daily, it's $416 a day.
Yeah.
You break it down you've got 4 servers where it's $100 a server, right?
Right.
So you got to get that, and that server works. Again, this goes to point out that if you do the numbers, it becomes easier to achieve because now you went from 150,000 to 2,884 a week to $416 a day.
Right.
At 4 servers, it's $100, and that server works 8-hour shift.
Right.
So now it's like, I don't know, 22, 3, $4 an hour.
Right.
So now it's like, hey, if I sell an extra drink per hour, or if I sell an extra appetizer, dessert, etc., it'll make up for that.
Sure.
So again, going back to planning it, making sure that you understand the numbers will allow you to do these things and will allow you to set in motion different ways of getting to that top line revenue, and then obviously that impacts your net profit anyway at the end of the day.
Right. And I would always set goals higher than what we actually want to achieve.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
But I mean, I remember this when I was running a frozen treat brand. We wanted to introduce a new product, and we had a certain sales target in mind, and we communicated that publicly. But we started to think backwards, like, how do we actually achieve it? Well, to achieve our goal or actual baseline that we wanted, we needed to sell 5 of these items per day per location. Seemed pretty reasonable, right? Yeah. But to the system, to the group, we said, hey, the goal is 10 per day. I see. We averaged 7.
Yeah.
Not only did we achieve our goal, we exceeded it because it's
a mental barrier.
It's psychology.
Like when you hit that,
people are thriving to hit this number that you put in front of them.
Yeah. And
even if they come up short, you're still doing better than where you were.
Absolutely. Right? You could play these brain games to put yourself. That's why, obviously I follow some of these guys and they say, well, think 10x bigger. Because if you're only thinking 1x, then you're going to achieve half of it. But if you think 10x bigger, then everything becomes easier to digest.
Right.
The money you're investing, the time you're putting in, everything kind of falls in perspective because you're like, this is the goal. I'm trying to accomplish something that nobody else is trying to accomplish.
That's right.
Here at Milagro, we've solved all of these complex problems of the loyalty and the integration and everything that we've discussed in this podcast. So if you're interested to learn more, contact us and schedule a demo.